Okay, if the committee room will please come to order. Clerk, can you open the rolls?
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
And do we have Senator Obenshain remotely?
You do.
Okay, great. Even
Thank
better. Okay, just a few announcements, and then a few announcements before we get to Secretary Wheeler's here, and is Secretary Lohr also here? Okay, but a few announcements before we get to that. First of all, I forgot to announce the formation of the all-powerful Dogs and Cats Subcommittee, which will be, well, you're on it, Barbara. Senator Favola, Senator Marsden, and our newest member, Senator Hackworth. So if you have bills involving domestic animals, Stanley, you'll be in front of the Dogs and Cats Committee. And Senator Marsden is the chair, and so he will set those hearings separately. Okay, we also have some bills that we need to take by today. Sean, can you please report it was Senator Kiggins had a bill she wanted to take by. What was the number on that?
Mr. Chair, Senator Kiggins requested that Senate Bill 569 go by for the day.
Okay, can I have a motion on that? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that Senate Bill 569 go by. All in favor say aye. Okay, and then I also had, I believe, two bills from Senator Marsden. Dave, what numbers are those?
Senate Bill 28.
Senate Bill 28 and...
One moment, please. And Senate Bill 537.
And Senate Bill 537. So Senate Bill 28 and Senate Bill 537. Could I have a motion on those to go by today?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, those bills are by for the day. And then I have Senate Bill 249, which was Suravel's bill on animals. I'll just leave it at that. It was too hot for the Dogs and Cats Committee to handle. That's strictly a... But if I could have that bill go to courts of justice, have a second on that motion? Second. This is to send Senate Bill 537 to courts. All in favor say aye. Aye.
It's a roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Oh, it's a roll call vote. Okay, clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Okay.
Ayes 11, noes 1.
Ayes 11, noes 1. All righty. Any other preliminary matters, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Chair.
Secretary, I'm sorry. Senator McClellan.
If we could have Senate Bill 482 go by for the day as well.
Senate Bill 482. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Can I have a motion on that, please? All right, we have a motion and a second that Senate Bill 482 go by for the day. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, that goes by for the day. All right, anything else we need to get off the docket before we get started? Okay, all right, thank you very much, and hopefully we've got everybody in their positions. We've got two guests today that have come forward that have been nominated to be secretaries. I'm going to introduce first, is Matt Lohr here? Matt? Not here? Not here, okay. And then next we have Andrew Wheeler, who's been nominated to be Secretary of Natural Resources. Andrew, why don't you come forward? And I think what we'd like to do is, first of all, please make a presentation, tell us a bit about yourself, and then I know that members of the panel would like to ask you questions.
I assume it's all right to take off my mask so I
Please, please.
All right.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for the invitation to appear today. I've been a resident of Virginia, an environmental attorney for over 30 years. I began my career at the EPA in 1991 as a career employee in the chemicals office. And over the course of the next 4 years, I won 3 EPA bronze medals for my performance at the agency. I then worked in the United States Senate for 14 years, becoming the staff director and chief counsel of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Next, I went into private practice, where I represented over 25 different clients. As the press reports, I did represent a coal company, but they don't report that my number one project for that company was advocating for the Miners Protection Act to shore up the retirement and health care benefits of the United Mine Workers, legislation that was co-sponsored by Senators Kane and Warner and most of the Virginia House delegation, including Congressman Moran and Conley. I also represented an air quality district in California, a solar company, Renewable Fuels Trade Association, and several farmers and food producers, along with another 24 other clients. I was, excuse me, I was then tapped to be the deputy administrator of the EPA and took over as the administrator after only 8 weeks when the president asked me to step up after the resignation of my predecessor. I calmed the atmosphere at the agency. I involved the career staff more in the decision-making as we move forward. During my tenure at the EPA, we reduced air pollution 7% by the end of 2019. That was pre-COVID. It reduced much more in 2020 because of COVID, but prior to COVID, 7% reduction in the 6 criteria air pollutants, cleaned up 82 Superfund sites, double the number of the previous administration, finalized the lead and copper rule, the first update in over 30 years to address the Flint, Michigan issue nationwide. This included the first ever national mandate to require testing of the drinking water in schools and daycare centers. We finalized 4 regulations to address greenhouse gases, including the first ever regulation to address greenhouse gases from the aviation industry, which actually was finalized this past year by the Biden administration as we had proposed. We also had a robust enforcement policy, collecting more in civil and criminal penalties than the previous administration. Before the hearing began, I talked to a few people in the audience who represent some zoos here in the state. One of the things I did as administrator was phase out the testing of animals for EPA regulations. I'm happy to address any concerns you may have about my background, but I really want to focus on what we as Virginians need to do going forward. I did not apply to be the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. I served on Governor Youngkin's landing team for the Natural Resources landing team, and when I briefed him on the problems that we face with the Chesapeake Bay, he ended up offering me the position. I told him, as you all know, that we are not on track to meet the 2025 WIP for the Bay. The current plans enacted by previous administrations fall short. More work needs to be done by everyone if we're going to improve the Bay and meet our deadlines. That is why last week I appeared before this committee to support speeding up the timeline for the City of Richmond to end the dumping in the James River. Since last week, I've been working with the DEQ staff and staff from the Finance Department to come up with a plan, and I'm supposed to meet with the Mayor of Richmond tomorrow to go over that, to explain to him different funding options and different ways of getting the funding in order to meet the demands and needs of the city. I understand the mayor has COVID, and I heard on the news that he's canceled his meetings for the rest of the week. I hope he is healthy, and I hope to meet with him as soon as he's able to have meetings. But we had planned to meet tomorrow afternoon to go through the funding options for the city. The governor believes that with my unique background of having run the EPA and working in a senior leadership position in the U.S. Senate, that I know how to access federal funding and assistance to make a difference for the state. I have been a strong proponent for the Bay, and I can get the job done. In addition, I want to bring more certainty and transparency to our permitting process through efficiencies and opening up the process so that the citizens know what is going on in the permitting process. I want to implement the Coastal Resiliency Plan, and I understand the committee was going to consider legislation today that may come up next week, but this is very important to the governor and it's very important to me. During the landing team, I was briefed on the Coastal Resiliency Plan that was released in December, and I'm looking forward to working with the staff and the people who worked on the Resiliency Plan. We need to do that for coastal Virginia. As an Eagle Scout and an avid hiker and camper, I want to promote our statewide outdoor experiences for all Virginians. This includes an assessment of our needs and goals to promote greater access. Many of our parks are oversubscribed. We need to do an overall review of what our resources are and encouraged more use by more Virginians. The environmental problems we face in the Commonwealth are immense and will take bipartisan initiatives to both protect and conserve our natural heritage. I have a long career in trying to bridge differences on these issues and protect the resources we all share. I participated in many bipartisan legislative efforts in my 14 years in the Senate, and I worked hard as the EPA administrator to come up with bipartisan solutions to a number of problems that face the country. I have said for over the last 35 years that the best job that I ever held was Nature Conservation Director at a Boy Scout summer camp when I was in college. I worked there for 3 summers. When I became EPA Administrator, I said that it was now a tie between the 2 jobs as my favorite job. Today, with the conservation portfolio in this Secretariat, this may very well top every job that I have ever had because of the combination of the environmental protection with conservation. With your support, I want to make a positive difference, and I know that I can. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Do we have questions from the panel? Senator Lewis.
I just have a couple, Mr. Wheeler. Welcome and thank you for coming in front of us today. And I very much appreciate your, given my district, given my upbringing, I certainly very much appreciate your remarks regarding the Chesapeake Bay. But I'm having trouble squaring that with the 90% cut in funding proposed to the Bay programs during the Trump administration when you were director of the EPA.
I'd be happy to address that.
Please.
Please.
So that was $82 million for the Chesapeake Bay geographic program. There's about a dozen geographic programs across the country. None of them are ever authorized by Congress. What the White House did was zero out those programs knowing that Congress was going to restore the funding. That $82 million, for large part, goes to the staff salaries, the building, all that would have been paid for regardless of whether or not that earmark for the $82 million was in the budget. What I focused on instead of the politics, because that was a political issue between the White House and Congress, what I focused on instead was trying to find additional funding for the Bay, because $82 million a year is not enough. And I secured funding through other programs at EPA, $500 million. For example, I got $220 million for Newport News for the program there for the water reuse. And I got $202 million for the city of Baltimore for a new waste treatment plant. I got millions of dollars for farmers in Pennsylvania because that's where one of the last remaining big problems we have with the Bay. Altogether, over $500 million and commitments for another $1 billion because the WIFIA loan for Newport News is actually over $1 billion. They've only accessed $220 million. But the $1 billion program for Newport News was approved under my watch. So if you put all that together, well over $1 billion during my tenure at EPA to support Bay programs around all throughout the whole geographic area to clean up the Bay. I left the $82 billion argument for the politicians to hammer out, and I focused on getting the resources that the Bay communities needed in order to clean up the Bay and make a difference.
One follow-up question.
Yep, please, Senator Lewis.
And the other thing that concerns me a little bit, for obvious reasons, is Governor Youngkin's administration's commitment to remove us from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. You mentioned a Coastal Resilience Authority bill carried by Senator Kiggins, and that gives oversight of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which I had legislation to create, to them. The unfortunate thing of it is if we remove ourselves from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, there will be no money in the Community Flood Preparedness Fund to deal with all of these planning and project issues. Not only that bill focuses on coastal issues, the intent was that it focus on Commonwealth-wide issues. So where are we going to find the money for those important efforts?
I'm not prepared to address where we're going to find the money today for that program, but I am committed to working with the legislature to make sure that we have the funding for that. Coastal resiliency is very important. I was impressed with the depth of the report that came out in December. and the recommendations in the report that need to be implemented. As far as Reggie, I know the governor is very concerned about the burden on the ratepayers in the state of Virginia and how much money would stay in Virginia versus going to other states. And he has, through his executive order, directed the Department of Environmental Quality to do an assessment of Reggie, which they have already started. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that process, to see what the staff recommends and what they have to say on the Reggie. As far as other alternatives, Virginia is on a glide path to reduce their CO2 emissions because of the number of the coal plant closures that have happened in the state over the last few years. We need to do more. We need to do more as far as encouraging more renewables across the board, but there are other ways of addressing greenhouse gases if the state does decide to withdraw from Reggie, which I understand part of that decision would be up to the legislature.
One final question.
Yeah, Senator Lewis.
And that brings up a more fundamental question for me. You do believe in climate change, don't you?
Yes, I do. That's why I finalized 4 regulations when I was EPA administrator. And, you know, it would have, if you don't mind, I'm attacked for, in the press and by some environmental groups, for, quote, rolling back the Clean Power Plan, which is the Obama administration's regulation to address greenhouse gases from the utility sector. I didn't roll that back. That was actually stayed by the Supreme Court. So when I got to the agency, we had a regulation which was unprecedented for the Supreme Court to stay that. I believe it went beyond the confines of the Clean Air Act, and that's why I believe the Supreme Court stayed the regulation. So I directed the staff, come up with what we can do to address the problem within the confines of the Clean Air Act, and we put forward the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. The Affordable Clean Energy Rule went into effect. It was stayed by the D.C. Circuit on January 19th of last year. But the Supreme Court, on appeal by the state of West Virginia, has taken that issue up, and it's already been briefed to the Supreme Court, which I think reaffirms my position that the Clean Power Plan was outside the confines of the Clean Air Act, which is why the Supreme Court has taken up the regulation. And I believe that at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is going to say that we had the right approach in following the law. We did not have a lot of leeway on what to do on climate change as an agency at EPA because Congress, the United States Congress, never actually passed any climate change statutes, legislation. So we had to work within the confines of the laws that we had on the books. I could have very easily not done anything to address CO2 from the electric power sector. I had a petition before me from a conservative think tank that wanted me to overturn the endangerment finding. And if I overturned the endangerment finding, then I wouldn't have to do a regulation. I actually denied that petition because I didn't think that followed the Supreme Court decision in Massachusetts versus EPA. I thought we were required to do the endangerment finding. So in implementing the endangerment finding, it required a regulation. But what I told the staff was I want a regulation that follows the Clean Air Act because I know the difference between legislating and executing the laws. If I'm confirmed as a secretary, I will execute the laws that the legislature passes. I will not create new laws on my own. I know the difference between the two roles. And I was dealt a hand by the U.S. Congress, a very limited hand on what the authorities I had to do anything on climate change. But I did do 4 regulations on climate change, including the first ever to address greenhouse gases from the aviation industry.
Okay, let me do this.
Thank you. That's enough.
All right, I want to move it around so other people can have a chance to ask questions. I've got a line of speakers here. Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for appearing before our committee. One of the challenges for somebody in your position would be to bring along business interests so they will take the steps necessary to actually achieve some of the climate goals that this General Assembly and a large number of Virginians believe we should achieve. And in the area of energy efficiency, buildings actually emit about 40% of our carbon emissions are coming from buildings. We have not updated our energy efficiency standards for buildings for some time, and in part because builders and others don't want the standards to be aggressively upgraded so we get energy efficient buildings. How would you go about achieving more energy efficient buildings. And the broader question is, how do you see yourself incentivizing private sector partners to be more aggressive in implementing positive climate change strategies?
Certainly. First, I'm going to have to better familiarize myself with the regulations and the laws that have already been passed on energy efficiency in the state of Virginia. Again, I didn't apply for this job. It came about over the Christmas holidays, and I've spent the last few weeks trying to learn everything across the board that I need to in order to fulfill my obligations in the position. My history on energy efficiency is we put energy efficiency provisions in several energy bills that passed the United States Congress, in the 2005 energy bill, the 2007 energy bill. When I was in private practice, I represented an organization, Underwriters Laboratories, which is the third-party verifier for energy efficiency programs. I always thought it was ironic. The only issue that I was recused from working on at EPA was the Energy Star program. And I was recused from working on Energy Star because I lobbied on behalf of it to keep the integrity of the program at EPA. There were efforts in the United States Congress to take Energy Star away from EPA and give it to Department of Energy, and I thought it was important, and so did my client, to keep it at EPA and to have that dual role for energy efficiency in the Energy Star program. So I thought it was ironic that the one issue that I couldn't work on at the agency for 2 years was the Energy Star program, which I care quite a bit about. I think Energy Star has been very successful. There's also the LEED standards for buildings. My law firm was in a platinum LEED building in Washington, D.C., the first platinum LEED building in the city. So I think it's working with the private sector. I think it's working with organizations, the third-party verifiers. There's several different standards that are out there. There's competing standards to LEED, and I'm right now blanking on the name of the major competitor to LEED. But it's working with those organizations and with developers and builders, because the public, the American public, Virginians, want to have more energy efficiency. They want to have apartment buildings, office buildings that are more energy efficient, and there is so much potential that we can tap into on the energy efficient side to bring down greenhouse gases and bring down the cost of energy across the board. There's a lot of potential there. People have called it before a separate energy source, energy efficiency, because by making things more efficient, we use less energy. And we emit less greenhouse gases. So it is very important, and I would be more than welcome to work with you or any other members of the legislature on ideas for encouraging more energy efficiency.
All right. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for joining us today. I appreciated the conversation that we had a few weeks ago in my office. My question for you, one of my concerns during the Trump administration was the way in which so many of our leading scientists, our researchers, and all across in many, many disciplines and fields were sidelined in significant ways. And I'm just curious, from your perspective now, should you be appointed, how do you plan to engage or listen to, collaborate with some of our, particularly our climate scientists? And kind of as a corollary to that question, who do you routinely talk to? Whose advice do you seek? How do you work with them? And what are your plans as we go forward, particularly around climate science?
Certainly. One of the things I did when I got to the agency is I asked for detailed briefings from the career climate scientists at the agency. They gave me a lot of materials to read. Every night I went home with a notebook, this thick, for the next day's meetings, and I read everything my staff gave me. I relied upon the science advice from the agency scientists. Some of the criticisms that have been in the news have been around disbanding the subcommittee for the NACs. This is the ozone and PM NACs, and also our science transparency rule. I'll be happy to talk about both of those. On the subcommittees for the NACs, which is one of the ones where a lot of scientists actually complained, and they formed a separate committee outside of the agency. Under the Clean Air Act law, the agency is supposed to review the NAAQS every 5 years. The agency is, until I got there, we had never completed it in the 30-year history of the program. It always took 8 to 10 years. What I did when I got there is I asked the staff, come up with a plan that will get the review done within 5 years. We had the committee, the full committee that was created under the Clean Air Act, and then over the time, the agency had created these subcommittees that then fed up to the full committee. But the subcommittee process took 1.5 years to feed up to the full committee. So there's no way that we could continue the subcommittee process and still meet the 5-year deadline. And as I told members of the Senate and my confirmation, well, actually in the budget hearings, that, you know, if they want us to take 10 years, they need to change the law. But I was required to do it by 5 years, and if we don't get it done in 5 years, we would get sued and enter into consent agreements and have to speed up the process, which is not a good process. You should have a process that meets the law and that takes in all accounts of all the scientists. What I told the full committee, if you need additional outside advisors, we will arrange that. We will work with you to get whatever advisors you need, whoever they are, whatever specialty they are. I put no constraints on that at all. And then, I'm sorry.
Keep going.
Okay. On the science transparency, a lot of complaints in the press on the science transparency. I believe most of the complaints are centered around the bill the regulation that was originally proposed before I got to the agency. After I got there, we went back out for additional comment. And then the final regulation that I signed was very different from the original regulation that was proposed. I believe in transparency. When I started working at EPA, I worked on the Community Right to Know Act, the implementation of that act. And I firmly believe the more transparent we are in government regulatory processes, the more buy-in you get from the public about the regulatory decisions you make. What the science transparency regulation did was say, for every regulation, EPA looks at hundreds or thousands of studies, depending on the size of the regulation. I asked, and through the regulation, that the agency scientists identify those pivotal scientific studies that they relied upon for the regulation. So they would put on a regulation the list of all the studies they reviewed, but they didn't count all those studies equally. So the science transparency regulation required them to identify the pivotal studies they relied upon, then to make sure that the data in those studies was available to the public. If it was not available to the public, it had to be made available to the EPA staff. If it wasn't available to the EPA staff, it had to be made available to a third party to review the underlying data. If it didn't fall into any of those categories, the EPA administrator could still deem the science study important enough to include in the regulation regardless of the availability of the data. There was a lot of complaints because a lot of scientists don't want to share their data. But I firmly believe that if a regulatory agency is going to use a scientific study as the basis for a new regulation, people should be able to look at the study and the data underlying it. But because of public comment, I put the additional measures in place to make sure that the agency would always have the studies that they need to have in order to regulate based on the studies themselves. Okay. So it was all about transparency, and at the end of the day, there's not a single study out there that would be denied use by the EPA scientists if they believe it's important enough to be used. But I wanted as the default to try to make that data available to the public because, and this goes to climate science in particular, so much of the modeling that it's attacked on the public, on the left and the right, depending on the studies. A lot of the modeling data is not available to the public. People don't know the assumptions that go into the models. And I believe if all that information is made public and better understood, there would be more acceptance of whatever the issue is, including climate science. I hope that answered your question.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me move on to Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon,
Hello.
Mr. Whalen. How are you? I appreciate, and I think it's fair that you haven't read every environmental related law that we've passed here in Virginia, but I assume you're
Trying to
familiar-
keep up with what you're doing this session. I'm finding that difficult.
That's fair. I assume you are familiar with the Virginia Clean Economy Act?
Yes.
As Governor Youngkin has made no secret that if he had been governor at the time, he would not have signed it, and he's not a fan of it. But as it is the law of Virginia, And as you said, that you do believe that we need to reduce greenhouse gases. I would ask, are there any changes that the administration in general or you as Secretary are seeking to that act? And if so, what are they?
I have not looked at the act in terms of changes, and I've not discussed with anybody within the administration changes for that act. I understand the governor said if he had been governor, he would not have signed it, but we have not had any conversations about what changes he would seek or the administration would seek. But it is the law of the state, and as the law of the state, I will implement it.
Thank you. And the second law that we passed is the Environmental Justice Act, which made it the policy of the Commonwealth to promote environmental justice and ensure that it is carried out throughout the Commonwealth with a focus on environmental justice communities and fence line communities. I did not hear in your opening remarks any reference to environmental justice, so I just asked, what is your view of the concept of environmental justice and your role as Secretary of Natural Resources in ensuring that the agencies that fall under your purview incorporate that concept in their actions?
Certainly. So one of the first things we did at EPA, well, first of all, environmental justice has been around. It's actually at EPA, it was created as a small group by President George H.W. Bush back in the late 80s, I believe, early 90s. It was just getting started when I worked at EPA in 91, and I worked on EJ issues at that time because of the toxics release inventory. So I have a long, deep understanding and appreciation for EJ issues. I found over time that I believe a lot of the issues translate to socioeconomic issues. It's facilities are located in poor neighborhoods, and poor neighborhoods are often targeted for new facilities to be built. When I got to the agency, the Environmental Justice Program was in the Enforcement Office, which I think is the wrong place. That's at the end of the process. So we moved it to the Administrator's Office, so that the environmental justice issues could be taken into account in developing new regulations or going out with new grants. I thought it was important to make sure that the environmental justice issues were incorporated through all of the programs of the agency, not just after the fact, after the pollution has occurred in the enforcement arena. So I think what I did on environmental justice was a huge step forward to try to get the environmental justice concepts incorporated across the entire agency. I worked very hard on environmental justice issues through our brownfields program. They're under the Tax Act of, was it 2017? It created opportunity zones around the country, and these are based on zip codes for low-income zip codes. I worked hard to make sure that our brownfields dollars were targeted to those opportunity zones to the extent that they could, because that represented lower socioeconomic communities that needed help. I worked with a number of communities across the country, East Chicago, East St. Louis. During my tenure in St. Louis, and it was a great opportunity. I got to meet Ozzie Smith, former Cardinals player. We turned over a brownfields facility to the Boys and Girls Club of St. Louis, and he's creating, or he has created now, that was a year and a half ago, a golf clinic for inner city youth. I worked in Pueblo, Colorado, when I first became acting administrator. I'm sorry, deputy administrator. It came to my attention that there was a Superfund problem in a community in Pueblo, lower income, predominantly Hispanic, some Native Americans as well. There's high levels of lead in the soil in people's homes and the yards in the neighborhood. EPA had it on track to get cleaned up in 13 to 14 years. And I said that was not fast enough with children playing in those yards. So I got extra money for it. We speeded up the cleanup, and we got all the yards cleaned up within 2 years. We were slightly delayed on getting inside the houses because of COVID. That should have been completed by now, but what was going to take 13 to 14 years for a minority community, we got it done in 2 years. And I would love to have had the time to look at every single issue, but what I also did was promote those issues within the agency to let the staff know that they need to be focusing on Superfund sites, for example, where people live and where they're exposed to chemicals, particularly the subpopulations that are affected by things like lead. And for children, the younger the child, the worse the impact lead has on them. So I thought it was very important that we save generations of children playing in yards impacted with lead in the soil. So things like that across the board.
Senator Mason, that's the last I have pre-signed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for being here. This weekend, there was an opinion piece in my local paper by two folks that worked under you as administrator. One was supported the Science Advisory Board and the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee. And they suggested that up to that point, objective, peer-related, and this was related to your answer on transparency from Senator Hashmi, had been accepted at the administration, but that your administration took particular aim at epidemiological research on the health impacts of particulate matter, particularly with agency clean air standards. They suggested that at that point, you had said that unless you can evaluate, as you just said, the underlying data, and I think you laid out 2 or 3 different ways, that the veracity of the study could not be verified. Hospitals, health professionals, and researchers objected to that. They suggest that a federal court quickly overturned the fact that you said unless you can see that data and who was dealt with, that it was going to be irrelevant. So I wanted to give you a chance to respond, and this is not under your purview, but we are addressing mental health here. And what we're doing is we're taking reports to our behavioral health center, and we are taking the patient, the courts, the treatments, and going to try to get as much information as we can from that reporting. And then we're going to de-identify the people, of course, that were impacted by that. Would we be able to use that to improve our mental health system if, in fact, what they suggest, your direction was true? And I wanted to give you a chance to address their piece that they had this weekend. Thank you, Mr.
Yes, you could, and I did not see that piece. There's been a number of things written about me over the last week or two, and I missed that one. But let me take a step back on the health data, because that is very important. On some of the complaints were that I didn't want health data of people to be used, and that's not the case. You can mask the identifying information for the people. So on studies, which is why, for example, I included in the final science transparency rule the provision that the data could be reviewed by a third party. One of the bills that I worked on in the Senate back in the late 90s was, and this was having to do with the Harvard 6 Cities study that's used for a lot of the PM studies across the country and a lot of the EPA work on PM. The Harvard 6 Cities study, for years the data was never available, and EPA still hasn't seen the underlying data. But I was able to get through bipartisan compromise a provision, and I think it was a highway bill. Sometimes you have to be creative where you put provisions. To have an outside group called the Health Effects Institute actually get the data, review it, and produce a report saying whether or not the data made sense with the findings of the study. And so I took that route back in the late 90s as a Senate staffer, and I included that in the science transparency bill. As far as the epidemiological studies, there was epidemiological science that said that this was a problem and the standard needed to be changed, but there's also more traditional health effects questions that the Science Advisory Board, the CASAC Review Board for the regulation said we really do need to do more research. And so what I ended up deciding on that issue was to stick with the Obama regulation. So I didn't weaken the regulation. The Obama regulation, which was set in, would have been 2012, I believe. Anyway, during the Obama administration, they set the standard for both ozone and PM. So I did not change the Obama standard. There was epidemiological research that said you could go lower, but it was a range. So I could stay with what the Obama administration had, or I could have gone lower on the standard. But the Science Advisory Board said you could go lower, but we really do need more additional data to better understand the health effects, looking at physiological aspects of people. So what I did in the final decision on that was keep the standard for 5 more years that the Obama administration set, and then recommend additional areas of study for the agency to undertake. And that would be through funding of new grants for scientific studies, so that for the next 5-year review, we would have those scientific questions hopefully answered as far as what the additional health effects may or may not be. So it was not, I didn't weaken standards, I kept them the same as the Obama standard, and I called for more studies to answer the questions that the CASAC panel put to me, saying, we have these unknown things that we would like to know before we can recommend. It was a mixed decision. I think there were 8 or 9 scientists on the KSAC panel. I think 2 of them recommended we go lower, and then the chair and the other members said, keep the standard the way it is, but request the additional data. I will say that a lot of the EPA staff wanted me to go lower, but I relied upon the KSAC, which is the outside scientific panel review, and I went with their overall recommendation to keep the standard the same until we had more of the data on the health impacts.
Okay. I've got 2 people left in the queue, and then we're going to have to move on, so Senator Stewart.
I'm happy to stay all afternoon.
I
if you'd
know
like.
you are.
There's a lot of accusations against me, and I would love
Well,
to cover them all.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andrew, you mentioned in your opening remarks that we are not on track to meet the TMDLs for the Chesapeake Bay consent decree, which I believe are due in 2025. Is that accurate?
That's true.
And you know that this is something very important to me, having worked on this issue for years, and despite the efforts of other administrations, we find ourselves in the position of not being on track to meet those TMDLs. Do you have strategies to help us meet those TMDLs?
Yes, I do, and it's a combination, I believe, of working with the communities on their CSO issues, which is why why the administration, why the Youngkin administration supported the legislation last week for the city of Richmond and the James River. It's also working with a lot of medium and small communities as well, and they need additional funding. And I spent the last day and a half meeting with the DEQ staff as well as the finance department staff to come up with some creative approaches on trying to find funding to help the communities. It's also working with the ag community as well. And one of the things that I did was provide a lot of grant money to farmers in Pennsylvania to help them come into compliance. You know, Pennsylvania is that rare state in the Chesapeake Bay where they don't really have the benefits from the bay, but they cause a lot of the issues and problems. So, and a lot of it coming from the farmers. So I worked with them. I worked with them on not just providing funding, but also some innovative approaches. We launched a pilot on nutrient trading at the agency. Also worked with using some research grant money. And I went out and looked at a farm in Ohio where they, by measuring the amount of the soil on a 6-inch basis, they were able to determine how much fertilizer they needed every 6 inches in their field, and they applied it in the fall. So they were able to use much less fertilizer by doing it in the fall than having fertilized in the spring. I worked with farmers when I was at the agency all across the country. Every state I visited, I sat down with, I visited a farm and met with farmers and heard their issues and concerns and worked creatively to come up with solutions. Did the first ever memorandum of understanding between EPA and FFA, Future Farmers of America, because I think it's important to work with the farmers at a young age. So I had a very open door, I had an open door with everyone, but I purposefully went out to work with the farmers across the country, and that's going to have to happen here in Virginia because the farmers are going to have to do more, but we're going to have to really work with a lot of the cities and communities on the CSO issues.
Thank you. Last question, Senator Morrissey.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wheeler. First of all, thank you for coming here today. Many people might say it's the lion's den that you've come down to. I appreciate you doing that. I listened very carefully to your opening remarks, and you talked about your efforts to reduce air pollution 7%. You cleaned up 82 Superfund sites. You formulated mandates to clean drinking water for school children. You're focused on greenhouse gases, and you made it very clear that you're absolutely desirous of implementing a coastal resiliency plan. All of those things that you've said, I don't think anything have been chipped away by any of the questions that have been asked of you. Why do you think you are such a lightning rod of controversy, and I'm saying this, asking this question respectfully, among environmental groups? Because I'll be clear, what I've heard today, particularly in things that are important to me, all sound good. Why do you think you are that lightning rod?
First of all, I don't think the things that I did at EPA were covered very well by the press.
Okay.
I'm very hesitant to name the publication itself.
It's okay.
But for example, we did a brand-new program at EPA under my watch for grants for schools to get the old dirty diesel buses off the roads and replace them with cleaner buses. Brand-new grant program. I wanted to highlight it, so we did a press conference at EPA headquarters. I had a brand-new school bus in our courtyard. We had student groups. We had teachers association, principals, superintendents, put out a press release to all the press to invite them to come to the press conference so that they could get the word out about the program so that schools would know to apply for it. Several major national news organizations came to our press conference, although I don't think any of them actually wrote stories about it. One of the national newspapers did not respond to our press release announcing the press conference. So my press secretary called their environmental reporter and said, "Are you coming to our press conference this afternoon?" And was told point blank, "We are never going to write a positive news story about the Trump EPA, so I see no reason to come to your press conference." I face that on a daily basis, that our positive things were never covered.
Let me ask you a few questions, and I don't want to trespass on too much of the committee's time, so I'll ask you the questions, and if you could give as succinct answers as possible, I'd appreciate it.
I will try.
This committee had an opportunity to visit Sweetbriar College, and during that, we received a presentation about our state parks. One of the things that stood out in my mind was the amount of money that we need to put into the infrastructures in our state parks, fixing cabins, for example. Do you have a plan for that?
First, what I have proposed to the governor, and I've talked to the head of DCR, is that we need to do an assessment of where we stand on all of our state parks, what the needs are, and the parks where we could perhaps increase capacity. And I have a goal of increasing capacity at our state parks and then increasing usage of the state parks. One of the things that I think is an issue, and from what I can tell by getting on the website for the different state departments, is that if you live in a county, you have to go to the parks website to find out what parks are in your neighborhood. You have to go to the wildlife refuge to find out what wildlife opportunities are there, historic preservation, what historic events are in your community. I think we need to have all that together. I don't believe we have that. If we do, I apologize to whoever is operating that website, but I haven't found that yet.
Are you committed to putting the money into those programs to build up our for example, we rebuild or renovate our cabins in our state parks?
I have been around government long enough to know that I should not stand here and commit to an X amount of dollars in the future, but I commit to advocating for that within the administration and hopefully before the legislature when we identify the needs that we have. I think our parks need more resources.
The CSO problem in Richmond, I think, is a absolute environmental disaster waiting to happen. We heard testimony that over 2 billion gallons of raw sewage were deposited into the James River last year. Mm-hmm. You got my attention the other day when you were addressing that issue, and you said that you will help find the money to address that problem. How will you find that money? How soon can you do that? And will you absolutely commit to addressing the CSO problem?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, I've spent the last day and a half working with the staff to come up with what are the very available pots of money, some of which the city has never accessed before. WIFIA loan program, for example, but there's also some grant programs that I think could be useful for the city. Looking at potential state loan through this, it's called a SWIFIA, which is very similar to a WIFIA loan. That to this date, I think 3 states have taken advantage of it nationwide. Indiana, which took advantage of it under my watch, and then since then, I'm blanking on the other 2. That happened after I left the agency. But only 3 states have used that program to get federal dollars at very low interest rates to help water projects like the Richmond CSO. So I'm looking at a variety of options, and as I mentioned, I was supposed to sit down with the mayor tomorrow afternoon as what I hope will be the first of several discussions with the mayor and his staff. I want to present him my recommendations at this point, get the reaction to see what would work for the city, what might not work for the city, and then go from there. But I am committed to working with the city and the legislature to find the resources that we need to clean up the bay and to address the Richmond City issue with the James River.
All right, next to last question. You said a few moments ago that you agree that Reggie is the law of the Commonwealth. I think you
Yes.
said that, or maybe that was
Well, actually, I said yes, thank you. Reggie also is the law right now. The legislature passed Reggie. The governor has asked DEQ to do an assessment of Reggie, and that is ongoing. I've not seen any results. I believe the executive order called for a report back by February 15th on the status of Reggie.
Do you agree that Reggie cannot be adjusted or modified or eliminated by edict of the governor, and it has to be done by the General Assembly?
I think that would be part of the assessment that DEQ is undertaking, but from where I stand right now, Reggie is the law of the state, and, barring a legal analysis that I'm not undertaking myself.
Last question. You are a very articulate and persuasive individual.
Thank you.
You are.
I wasn't sure.
I'm being sincere and genuine when I say that.
Thank you.
Why do you think you weren't able to persuade your former boss, President Trump, about that climate change is real and has potentially devastating impacts on our environment?
To be honest, which I've been honest on everything I've said, of course, the discussions with President Trump on climate occurred before I became deputy administrator. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord in 2017. I joined the agency in April of 2018. My discussions with him after I joined were the CAFE standards, which he knew we were doing in part to reduce CO2 emissions, as well as the ACE rule. So my conversations with him, and I've also got to be very careful, despite of what's going on executive privilege, my conversations with the president are still under executive privilege. I'm focused on the individual regulations that we were working on during my tenure, but the broader policy decisions that he made and that the administration made happened before I got to the agency, so I'm not sure about the internal debates or the discussions that occurred.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for coming down. I really believe you answered the questions with specificity. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all members of the panel. Mr. Wheeler, you've spent almost an hour with us, and I
Really?
appreciate that. I would just simply say, sort of chairman's prerogative, we've had two very substantive pieces of legislation that we've passed in the last years. One was Reggie, the other one was the Clean Economy Act. Both were sponsored and authored by members of this panel. So as the chairman of this committee, I'm very protective of their accomplishments, and just simply would commend that to you. But again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to meet with any members of the committee or any members of the legislature one-on-one if you all have additional questions that you didn't get a chance to ask me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. I'm going to have Matt step up for just a bit. Matt, you don't get an hour. You get about 100 seconds. So if you want to just
My
introduce
apologies.
yourself.
I warmed him up for you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. My apologies. I was told that you wanted to hear me next week, so that's why I was not here. But I'm happy to share a little bit if you have the time, and I can be as brief as you want.
Well, just, Matt, why don't you just introduce
Yeah.
yourself and say your office and just, like I said, give us a minute of background.
Sure. Matt Lohr, I'm nominated for the position of Secretary of Ag and Forestry, and certainly appreciate the chance to see a lot of familiar faces here from my past roles. I love agriculture and forestry. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from Rockingham County. Everything I've done my entire life has been to advance these industries, and from being an FFAer back in the day to getting a degree at Virginia Tech to buying my grandparents' farm, working with farm bureaus and local ag clubs and groups, and then serving in the House for 5 years, 2006 to 2010, and then serving in the McDonnell administration as his Commissioner of Agriculture, again, getting the chance to work with many folks here in this room today. Spent 4 years at Farm Credit working with lending issues and especially attracting new folks into agriculture, and then the last 2 years was honored to serve in Washington at USDA as the Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the primary agency in the federal government working with conservation, addressing financial and technical needs for farmers, ranchers, and private forest landowners. And so tremendous opportunity there. Spent the last year on my farm, enjoying life a little bit more, and then was asked to consider this position for Governor Youngkin. So I'm honored to be in this position, to be able to serve this administration to continue advancing ag and forestry, our number 1 and number 3 industries in the Commonwealth. And so it's an honor to be here. I'm very, very fortunate. I got 2 kids that are both interested in hopefully being the 6th generation agriculturalists on our farm. Our entire farm is under permanent conservation easements because it's important enough to me that these next generations will always have an opportunity to farm if they so choose. So,
Okay.
thank you, sir.
All right, I have 2 people in the question queue. I'm serious. Please make it as brief as possible.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Senator Morrison, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to welcome Mac to the committee, and we were classmates in the
Sure.
House of Delegates class of 2006. I think there's only Delegate Bulova and the Speaker, Todd Gilbert, left, and
don't forget Mr.
Jennifer
McClellan
McClellan
here, yeah.
also. That's right, over here in the Senate. It is. But it is good to see you here, and I remember your good work at VDAX, and good luck.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Senator Morrissey. Oh, no, okay. All right. Thank you, Matt. Great to see you.
I think I got off a little better than Secretary Wheeler.
Well,
Thank you very
okay.
much. Appreciate it.
All right, what we're going to do is I'm going to take the non-members of the committee that have bills up, and I believe Senator Cosgrove, I believe we've got Senate Bill 50.
Yes, sir, Mr.
And
Chair.
thank you, everybody, for your patience. There was a lot to cover there, and I hope you all learned as much as I did. Senator Cosgrove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have Senate Bill 50 before you. Ms. Wallmeyer has some amendments that I'd like to offer to the bill.
Okay, Lisa, do you want to distribute those in whatever fashion you'd like?
Mr. Chairman, a substitute's been posted on LAS.
Okay, John, do you want to just describe to us?
Yes, sir. I'd be
what
glad
the bill
to.
is and what the amendment does?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 amendments. The bill would allow property owners to insert piles or ground disturbance not to exceed 10 square feet of subaqueous land. And the reason why I brought this forward is that if anybody just wants to drive a pile in Virginia waters, they have to go through what's called a JPA, a joint permit application that has to go through the Corps of Engineers, the VMRC, and the local wetlands board if one exists, okay? This is a fairly de minimis disturbance of underwater property. The amendments basically say that you can't do more than 10 square feet of piles every 5 years, because we don't want people just doing it every year or just putting piles out there wherever willy-nilly. Also, and the other amendment, that amendment that I just discussed, and the next amendment, I'm bringing forth at the request of VMRC. I talked to Commissioner Bowman before he left. The other one would say that these piles have to be outside of 50 feet from a navigable channel, so that there will be not any navigation interference from this as well. The final amendment, Mr. Chairman, was actually offered by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I found that acceptable. And that's the bill.
Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, your original bill I actually really liked it. This one, I do have a question about where you say on line 49 or 50 that you can only do it once every 5 years. So some of us suffer from ice in the wintertime, and
Right.
those pilings will get knocked down. If you get it, are we restricted in that regard, or is that an emergency repair? Why do we need to say not more than every 5 years?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm certainly open to any changes to this. I did this because I don't want somebody just going out and saying, okay, I can by right
Piece every year.
drive 10 piles a year for the next 20 years. All right, there has to be some quantity, some quantifier in there. And that's why I had that put in there. Again, that was a recommendation from VMRC, as well as the navigable
All
channel.
right, have we moved that amendment yet? I don't think we have.
We have not.
We have not. Well,
Second.
okay, I've got a motion and a second to adopt that amendment. Does anyone want to speak to it? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the amendment is adopted. What's that? Okay.
I don't think we wanted it.
Well, that's why I asked
You
if,
didn't want it, did you? You didn't want the amendment, mine. I did. I don't think I did.
Okay.
just adopted it.
We've got a little bit of unreadiness up here. Go ahead, Senator Stewart.
Would you consider it a friendly amendment if we just deleted the "and may only be driven once every 5 years" and leave the 50 feet from a marked navigation channel?
If that's the will of the committee, then I will be fine with that. I really think it's important to leave that 50-foot buffer, though.
I agree with you.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
And you know more about this than I do, John, because you do this sort of stuff as a engineer viewpoint. But you're relatively restricted in what your riparian rights are anyway. And
You are.
You can only go out as of right 50 feet, as I recall. You can't encroach on your neighbors.
Correct.
So there is some limitation that's placed on you geographically and lawfully without that every 5 years, it seems to me.
There is, Mr. Chairman. Basically, again, I was just trying to smooth things with VMRC.
I just worry about the ice.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would move that after channel on line 49, "and may only be driven once every 5 years," period, be deleted. And there'd be a period after channel on line 49.
Is there a second to that? All right, I've got a motion and a second. Sean, do you understand that amendment? Lisa? Okay. All right, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the amendment passes. All right,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I have a
Senator
quick
Mason.
question. 10 square feet. I mean, how many piles are you talking about being able to replace?
That could be, if they're 12-inch piles, there could be 10 of them. The 12-inch diameter pile.
In 10 square feet?
No. Each pile would be a square foot. So there would, if you were going to disturb 10 square feet,
Right. But
you
don't
could put
them-
in 10 12-inch piles. Because one pile, the diameter of one pile is only going to impact 1 square foot.
But, Mr. Chairman, you don't put them right next to each other, do you? I mean,
I think you say 10 inches.
okay. I'm
Why don't we
sorry.
do this?
Sorry,
Do we
I'm
have
slow.
anything resembling an expert?
That would be me.
Other than Senator Cosmo? Is VMRC here?
I'm not sure the VMRC can be here. They're kind of in transition of leadership right now.
Okay. All right, let me ask, do we have anyone to speak in favor of the bill other than the patron?
It looks like we do virtually.
Okay, put them on.
Chris Moore, please unmute and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. This is Chris Moore, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I want to thank Senator Cosgrove for working with us on the bill. I think this is an issue that he was trying to actually solve a local issue, and we're glad that he was able to make the changes we requested. And if there continue to be questions about the bill moving forward, we'll continue to work with him on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take that as a positive neutral. Okay. Anybody in opposition? I'll get to questions. Anybody in opposition to the bill?
For those attendees in the Zoom room who would like to speak in opposition to the bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, there are no hands raised at this moment.
Okay, I got, looks like Marsden has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple, if I might, Mr. Chairman. This is obviously for building a dock or a pier,
Or a
most likely.
a mooring slip as well.
I'm sorry?
Or a mooring slip.
A
mooring
boat
slip?
yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
So if, usually with these constructions, it starts on land, the pilings, the first maybe 1 or 2 or 4 perhaps. What determines subaqueous? I'm not familiar with the law on that. Would it be the high tide, low tide that would determine?
It would be ground under mean low water.
Ground
So-
under mean
Yes,
low water.
right,
And
it-
so this would allow, what is the general distance between piles?
Normally, when you drive piles for a structure, you're between 8 and 10 feet. That's the industry standard. So if you're building a pier or a dock, normally your piles are 8 feet. If you just want to put in a mooring slip, you only need to put in as many as you need to tie off your boat.
So this could be up to a 40, 50, maybe under some circumstances, 60-foot pier is what this would allow you to build?
No, sir. No. In order to build a pier, you need to have piles on both sides.
Right.
And stringers and headers and cross planks. With this, at only 10 piles, you really can't do a whole lot
Be a long walk off a short pier? Is
Yes,
that-
sir.
Okay, thank you.
Or you can hop from pile to pile, one of the two.
Okay. All right. I have Rachel Peabody apparently is in the queue. If you want to let her through.
Rachel Peabody, would you please unmute and begin your testimony? Rachel Peabody, would you please unmute? Mr. Chairman, it looks like she might be having, oh, she's here. Never
Hi,
mind.
I'm sorry, the Senate Zoom is on mute, so I can't hear you. I'm assuming you're trying to talk to me.
Yes.
Yes.
If you could unmute the Senate Zoom, that would be helpful.
Just somebody hold up a sheet that just says speak. Okay.
I'm still unable to hear the Senate Zoom.
Okay. No. All right.
Okay. 1 moment, Mr. Chair. The Senate Zoom is in fact muted. We're having a chat. We're going to get resolved immediately. Chatter.
Okay, we got to move on, guys.
Can you just chat her so that she can know to
If someone,
speak?
you can just text her and just tell her to go ahead and speak.
I don't have
Yeah, let me just make a general, is anyone in this room that is opposed to this bill? All right, Senator Morrissey.
Yes, sir.
Senator Cosgrove, I think in 30 years, have put in 3 big piers. First one down in the Wycomico River in Springfield Beach, on the James River, and another location. 2 things struck me about your bill. It says in I think it's the penultimate sentence, such piles may only be driven once every 5 years. Now, there's 2 things that I've noticed that have happened. Did you want to say something?
Oh, yes, actually, that amendment was stricken by the
That was
committee.
taken out?
Yes, sir.
Completely, okay. Second thing, each piling that goes in, you equate that to the disturbance of 1 square foot.
That's correct.
So the 10 square feet, that means 10 pilings.
It can be, yes, sir.
If you have a dock, you have 2 on each side.
That's correct.
And then if you have, at the very end of it, and say you want to put a boat slip where you can lift the boat up on hydraulics, it seems to me that 10 is not enough to put in that short pier with 2 pilings on each side, connected by stringers, and then put in the thing to lift the boat. Am I missing something?
No, sir, you're not. But at the same time, this bill is really aimed at people that already have an existing structure, that may want to repair the structure they have, or if, let's say you go out and you get a larger boat, it won't fit on your lift, but you want to put in mooring piles so you can keep your boat by your dock, this would allow you to do that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, I believe we have brought on the Rachel Peabody. So Rachel Peabody, go ahead and unmute and please testify.
Hi, I'm Rachel Peabody. I'm here to answer any questions specifically that you have. I'm sorry, I just missed about 5 minutes of the last bit of conversation. So if there's specifically questions on how we administer our current regulations, please fire and I'm happy to help.
Why don't we just do this? You're with VMRC?
Yes, sir.
And do you all have any objections to the bill? Any unreadiness?
We don't have a position on the bill at this moment. We do just have a question on whether this would be for 10 square feet of piles in.
There we go, okay. Okay, all right. Yeah, I think we've kind of heard enough on this at this point. All right.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I've got a motion, and thank you. I've got a motion and a second to report the bill. Clerk, open the roll. There we go.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Senator Obenshain votes aye.
And Senator Morrissey, next time you need a dock, call me.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you. That took a while. Okay. I see Suravel there. I've seen McDougal. You've been there a while. So Ryan, come forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 492.
Okay. Senate Bill 492, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we had an amendment drawn up for the committee to consider, but I'll just tell the committee the problem, and I think that you've had contact from a number of different places. East of 95, and particularly in some of the rural areas like the Northern Neck, where individuals use dogs to hunt either deer and or rabbits mainly, there are some individuals who do not like the fact that the dogs don't always go in the direction that they're intended to go and will set up snare traps in order to kill the dogs. And in one jurisdiction in particular, in Richmond County, there's been multiple incidences where dogs have been killed by the use of these snare traps. People set them, dogs get into them, and are caught, and then the dogs will ultimately be killed. Talking to that, the Board of Supervisors, and I have County Administrator from Richmond County, Morgan Quick, here asked us to bring forward a bill that would do something about that. We looked at different options. The bill, as it was presented, is a more generic ban, but really the issue is east of 95, where dogs are used to hunt and during dog hunting season. So I think Lisa drafted up an amendment last night that articulated that, in that it would only apply east of Interstate 95 during deer hunting season.
Okay, Lisa, do you want to report that?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, the amendment on line 13 after snare trap adds in any area of the Commonwealth east of Interstate 95 during deer hunting season. And that's online as well.
Mr. Chairman, I would say in relation to the amendment, Farm Bureau generously came by and articulated that they did not have a lot of excitement over my bill because of coyotes in the western part of the state. In the eastern part of the state, we use other means to eliminate coyotes. But this is very limited. And when I asked them east how many people were using snare traps, they said is either 10 or 12, they thought. And I asked for some specifics. When I asked them, they did not have those. So snare traps east of 95 are not really the prevalent means to eliminate coyotes. But I think they are in the western part of the state. And that's why we got to limit it.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, all opposed, no. All right, amendment passes. All right, anyone here to speak to this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I have Morgan Quick from the Richmond. He's a county administrator in Richmond County.
Okay, I know him. Hey, Morgan, good to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you all for having me today. I'm going to be brief. I'm the county administrator of Richmond County, and we did ask Senator McDougal to bring this bill. Unfortunately, we have had a couple of issues in the past couple of years with hunting dogs being killed in these snare traps. As most of rural Virginia, hunting in the eastern side in Richmond County, especially with dogs, is very prevalent. We are not asking a full ban. We understand the rules and regulations in place on this already, but a little bit further restriction on this would be appreciated. So, thank you very much.
Morgan.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just add one other thing. The Richmond County did try to go through Department of Game and Inland Fisheries to look at regulation.
Okay.
And the department declined to promulgate any regulation. So that's why I ended up bringing the bill.
All right, ladies, are you in favor or opposition? Favor? Just come forward and briefly say.
Sure. Molly Armis, I'm the Virginia State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. We definitely support SB 492. We supported the broader ban on snare traps. They're incredibly cruel. They cause animals to suffer, and obviously they also aren't indiscriminate. You know, we ask that you support SB 492.
Great. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Tabitha Treelor. I'm the Director of Communications for the Richmond SPCA. We also support the broader bill as introduced without the amendment. As the Humane Society has said, the Richmond SPCA also feels that these types of snare traps should be banned entirely. They're indiscriminate killers that can trap both the intended species and companion animals, wildlife. And the way that they kill is inhumane, and we would like to see the broader ban that was introduced.
Okay. Okay, so that's anyone in opposition to the bill? I understand we've got some pushback on the scope of it.
For those attendees in the Zoom room who would like to speak in opposition to the bill, please
right.
raise your hand
I have
electronically
a
now.
live witness. Ma'am, are you in favor or opposition?
I was in opposition, but I may be able to be in favor now.
Okay, well, why don't I get this young lady, why don't you come first?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Stephanie Talon with Virginia Farm Bureau. We do appreciate the opportunity to have conversations with the patron about this issue. In general, we do have concerns about any laws or regulations that restrict the ability of farmers to protect their livestock from wildlife damage via traps, which are a very valuable tool. We will leave this issue to the will of the committee. I do just want to clarify with regards to that statistic. USDA Wildlife Services, which provides very crucial services to our wildlife, for wildlife damage to our producers. It's our understanding that on average, during the time period and the location that this amendment would put forth, they work on average 10 to 12 farms in the east of the Blue Ridge during deer season. So just wanted to clarify what that statistic was, and I do apologize if that wasn't clear before.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Zachary Sheldon. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I had the opportunity to stop by the patron's office earlier today. So wanted to raise some concerns we do have with this legislation, both amended and the broader ban. Trapping is an important tool for a lot of wildlife management, and on the eastern shore, where we are doing a lot of threatened and endangered seabird restoration work, we rely on contracting of USDA Wildlife Services to set up predator control mechanisms, and that includes snare trapping and others to prevent foxes, coyotes, raccoons from both eating eggs, baby birds, and also adult birds. It's an important management tool and a broad, even with the we're on the east of 95 in that area, and we do trapping in the deer season. So it's just raising concern that this will have wildlife management impacts of broadband like this.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, come forward.
My name is Heidi Krosky, and I'm with the Virginia Animal Owners Alliance. So we are concerned, we want our pets protected, we want our farms protected. So if the amendment is put in, we can possibly support it, but in the broader ban, we would oppose it.
Okay, well, the
Thank
amendment's in right now.
Thank you. I
Okay.
just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, just so, in case anyone's confused, the amendment is in, so it's just east of I-95.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Marston.
Thank you. Just a reminder I've had the most unsuccessful campaign imaginable trying to deal with the tension between landowners and deerhound hunters over the past 6 years, setting the world's record for unsuccess. But this is just another example of the rising tensions between landowners and deerhound hunters who have very little respect for private property and unleash their dogs on people. And it creates this kind of emotion where people would actually do something this disastrous to harm innocent animals. Thank you.
So this is a warm-up for next week. Okay, great. Can't wait. All right, we have a motion to report. Do I have a second? Do I have a second on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to
I do have a
stop
second.
a train, but if there is the need to exempt out the natural, what is it, wildlife services that do some of this for the Nature Conservancy and then those other farms.
Okay,
I don't think there's any problem because they're doing it the right way.
All right.
Okay,
I think
we
that's
do that
something
on
we're
the
either
floor.
going to do on the floor or
Okay.
do in the House, because we've got a motion and a second. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Open the roll, please.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Senator Obenshain votes no.
Ayes 10, noes 5.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. All right. Next, I know Delegate Dillard, I see you. I'm going to get to you next, but do you mind if I take Survell first? Okay. All right. Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first bill, I assume, got referred.
Yeah.
We want to hear it anyway.
Yeah. Can't wait for that one.
Yeah, okay. So I think the first easiest one to take up is Senate Bill 248.
Okay, Senate Bill 248. What do you got?
Senate Bill 248 has to do with anaerobic digestion, and what that means is throwing a bunch of stuff in a cooker and letting it generate methane and then taking the waste product out and using it as a fertilizer or a soil amendment. And basically we're going to start using more and more of these types of digester systems to generate renewable methane. And the companies that want to come in and invest in these in the Commonwealth just want to make sure there's some certainty about the end product that comes out, what they can do, where they can put it, how it's labeled. I had a meeting over the weekend where I sat down with some of the waste digester folks in the Farm Bureau. We worked out agreed language, which I believe there should be a substitute rolling around somewhere, which needs to be moved.
We have a motion to adopt, okay, a motion and a second to adopt substitute. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, substitutes before us.
And the sub, in light of that, the Farm Bureau supports it. It's been reviewed by VDAX and DEQ. All who don't have problems with it. I'm not aware of anybody who's opposed anymore, and I would hope you would adopt the bill to just provide this clarity.
Okay, anyone here to speak either for or against the bill? Kyle, come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kyle Shreve with the Virginia Agribusiness Council. We were on that call and were able to work this out. Just for clarification, it does set a definition of anaerobic digestion and digestate in the VDAX code. It allows it to be a registered product and labeled as such so that a producer knows what they're getting and what they're applying to their land. We do support the bill. It is,
Okay.
Senator is exactly correct on the future of this product in Virginia.
Okay, Farm Bureau. Come forward.
We also support the bill. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, anybody opposed to the bill? Anybody online?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Hobie Bowen, please unmute and begin your testimony.
Hello, Hobie.
Hobie Bowen, would you please unmute and begin your testimony?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Hobie Bowen, Virginia Poultry Federation. Good afternoon. We appreciate the efforts of Senator Sturvell on this and think this could potentially be very helpful to various byproducts being processed from the poultry industry. So we also support the substitute, and thank the committee for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, so the substitutes before us, I think everyone has spoken. Do I have a motion? Okay, I've got a motion and a second to report the bill. Clerk, open the roll, please.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Sarah Obenshain votes aye.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Okay, next bill.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, the next bill is Senate Bill 250, if you really want to skip 249. Senate Bill 250, Mr. Chairman, is a bill that arose, I believe, out of your bill last session.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It has to do with fees to support the solid waste regulation program. Mr. Chairman, I believe you put it in a bill in last year, or you put in budget language, or both, but there was language in last year's budget directing the stakeholders to get together and figure out
Right.
the appropriate level of permitting fees that would provide 40 to 50% of support for DEQ's permitting program. They met in 3 separate meetings over the summer and fall. Their output of that meeting was reflected in Senate document number 15, which was filed. This bill represents what was in that document, represents what was a consensus between the landfill industry and DEQ. Mr. Chairman, I would say that the new administration has not taken a position on this bill yet. They're still considering their position, at least that's where they were last week. And I've been advised anything has changed, but the solid waste industry supports this bill, and I would ask that you'd report it.
Okay, let me just, so my bill last year was to set up a work group to set these fees, which I think for the most part are landfills, recovery stations, transfer stations, basically solid waste fees. So you're representing that these figures are what the work group decided on?
Yes.
And then they have this lines 43 to 46, which basically is a COLA, a CPI adjustment.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right. I think that's pretty straightforward. Who do you have to speak in support? There's the man.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Chuck Duvall, I represent Waste Management, but the Virginia Waste Industries Association also, I can speak on their behalf. Senator Sorvell outlined what took place. You were kind enough last year to change what was a fee bill into a work group, and that group met. We met in good faith, and what you see is the result of that product. So we ask your support the bill.
Okay. Is there any opposition? Okay. All right, no opposition. That sounds like a pretty good bill. All right. Okay, all right, we'll go to, so the motion is to report and refer. Okay, we have a motion to report and refer, a second? Okay, I got a motion to report and refer to Senate Finance. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Senator Obenshain votes no.
Come on, guys.
Ayes 9, noes 3, abstentions 3.
Okay,
Great. See you guys next week.
ringing endorsement. Okay. All right, Senator Morrison, why don't you go ahead and provide the bill, and I see my constituent out there and a longtime nemesis, Delegate Jim Dillard.
He's my secret weapon, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
It is, thank you. This is, the bill deals with an increase in the registration fee on passenger vehicles.
This is Senate Bill 545, by the way.
545, excuse
Yep.
me, thank you. And our parks are in crisis in terms of their funding. The increased use during the pandemic, the ongoing need for maintenance and operations have reached a critical point, and this is a way of addressing that by a $5 fee charged to each registration here in the Commonwealth. And this bill would add a section that would require the individuals to pay an additional $5 state park and natural area preserve access fee when registering or renewing a registration of a non-commercial vehicle with the Department of Motor Vehicles. This would provide a steady funding stream to support Virginia state parks and natural area preserves and provide unlimited parking for visitors with Virginia license plates. A vehicle registration fee has the potential to increase equitable access to state lands based on all Virginia residents with registered vehicles would be able to access parks at a reduced rate. This would increase attendance among lower income communities who currently do not have the disposable income to purchase an annual pass or pay day use fees. Moreover, by tying fees to the number of vehicles owned rather than park visitation, those affluent enough to own multiple vehicles pay a larger share. Potential cost savings and improved speed and efficiency in our park contact stations and parking enforcement activities due to the fact that all Virginia registered vehicles will already be in fee compliance. Other residual savings would be realized in the labor savings, printing, and postage associated with the elimination of the fulfillment of our current Park Pass program.
Senator Morrison.
Conservative estimates place that at around $75,000 to $100,000 in
Okay,
savings.
I want to get right to it. I strongly support this bill. Where's the language that says that once you pay this extra fee as part of your registration, you get in free to the parks? Because that, to me, is what makes it exciting.
Line what? I'm sorry.
Line 17.
Line 17, Mr. Chairman.
Lines. Okay. Oh, so in order to show that proof of payment, how would that physically happen? Would they see your Virginia tags?
That's all it would take. That's what makes this so easy for people and to get people on and off onto the property.
All right. What if Suderline wants to add a vaccination requirement? Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Marsden, I want to get these parks funded, and I think there are various ways like dynamic pricing and other things that we can do this. But why should we put this all on the residents of Virginia to pay for this when, gosh, I don't know what the numbers are, but there are an awful lot of people from out of state who use our parks. If you come to Westmoreland State Park, where I grew up, you can't even get in there on the weekends or holidays for the people from Maryland and D.C. But yet you're going to fund all of this on the backs of Virginians, and those folks aren't going to pay any to help take care of these parks. That, to me, doesn't seem fair.
No, sir. There would be a fee charged
They'd pay the fee
to out-of-state users, and it can be a higher fee. As long as you're offering Virginia residents as a discount, you meet constitutional requirements, I understand.
Yes, Senator Stewart.
How do you charge them a $5 fee on their registration?
You
We have no
don't. You
authority
charge
to
them
do
when
that.
they enter.
They pay at the door, they pay when they enter.
They got to pay the cover charge.
They would pay a charge when they enter the park, like we do now.
Mr. Chairman, well, then why don't we just increase the fees to get into the park? But every Virginian's not going to visit a park.
Well,
Therein lines
not
are
every,
up.
but
Okay.
those who continually do so, it's a discount to them.
All right, I think we've just reached the tension. Okay. If we can get supporters. So why don't I get Delegate Dillard, and then I'll get my friend with the state parks, Friends of the State Parks.
Can we hand this out?
Okay? Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much. I'm Jim Dillard, and I'm representing TIPS, which is Taylor Murphy's Initiative for Park Sustainability. Taylor was with us in this effort until, unfortunately, he passed away. Last year, Delegate Orrock passed House Bill 1804 with unanimous consent in both the House and the Senate. And it did a couple of things, and one of the things it did was look at the needs of our state parks, both from a financial standpoint and a standpoint of personnel. What we found out was that the parks require to be run efficiently $158 million a year. The present budget, unfortunately, is only $47 million, of which the General Assembly only funds, I think, a measly $19 million on average for that. We have a major fiscal problem. We also have a major personnel problem. And we're short by 304 individual classified employees to run our state parks. And the good news is, way back in 2003, we passed a bond issue. That's good news. It allowed us to build all these new parks. The bad news is we never properly funded them. So we're short 304 classified employees in our parks. You open up Widewater, you take somebody from Lee, Sylvania, which is 5 miles up the Potomac, and both parks are understaffed, and that's one of our problems. The other thing 1804 did was look at ways to actually fund our state parks. And Dave Marsden is providing one of those things, and the staff on that study said that the Park Pass had a high potential for solving this, and there are 3 states that now presently use the Park Pass, and their attendance has increased dramatically in those 3 states. I would also point out that the parks need sustainable funding. Historically, for those of you who've been around a while know that the parks have always been the first one to cut and the hardest to get funded. Historically, the parks have been underfunded and understaffed, and this bill will go a long way, not solving it, but certainly helping with that particular situation. As you know, also, tourism is a major factor in Virginia's economy, and the parks play a major role in that. And they're having difficulty meeting that particular obligation and help for the state because they are, in fact, understaffed and underfunded. And Dave Morrison's bill will help solve that, and that'll raise about $30 million. And for that, as he pointed out, all Virginians with a Virginia tag will have the option of free access to all of our parks and natural resource areas. The parks also play a major role for helping people cope with COVID. During the COVID crisis, we have seen our park attendance spike, and it's been primarily, not doesn't primarily, but a large group of that have been the low-income people in the state of Virginia. Having free access to the parks with a mere $5 addition on their car registration, that would go a long way in helping solve part of our whole problem with environmental equity. And so this would go and help that particular issue. The last thing I would say is that this is a solvable problem. A lot of things we can keep throwing money at. I guess education is a big example of not being able to fully fund what we need there. But this is actually an area that you can solve. If you remember, we're $111 million short, 304 personnel short. Dave Marsden's bill, Senator Marsden's bill, will go a long way in providing at least $30 million to help solve that particular problem. I would certainly urge you to be part of the solution, and I thank you very much for your support.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Dillard. Yes, sir. Next up.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the panel. My name's Tim Kennel. I'm the president of the Friends of Bear Creek Lake State Park. I'm also the president of the Virginia Association for Parks, and I had a real opportunity to meet you all out at Sweetbriar, and it's good seeing you again. I urge you to support Park Pass legislation patroned by Senator Marsden by adding that $5 registration fee to a privately owned vehicle. Park Pass would allow unlimited free access to our parks and natural areas as well as state parks by all Virginians. Yeah, this is a new fee, bad word, new fee of $5, but it's a reasonable annual fee. What we're doing now is unreasonable for for us that live in Virginia and having to pay $5 to $10 every day that you go to a Virginia state park. $5 is a great deal. 41 parks over 63 natural areas, $5, 365 days with as many people as you can pile in a minivan. It's a great, great deal. In order to achieve environmental justice, all members of the public must have access to Virginia state parks. Entry and parking fees would be eliminated other than for out-of-state visitors. The Park Pass gets us a long way. It's a good step towards environmental justice. And the annual operation and maintenance needs of our outstanding parks have been underfunded and understaffed for decades. Part of the study that DCR did under last year's HB 1804 was determine the needs for state parks, which was somewhere around $158 million. This goes a long way to helping parks. And although Park Pass wouldn't completely overcome that shortfall, it would make an invaluable difference, and coupled with adequate general fund appropriations, inadequate parks funding could be solved. The Park Pass is reliable, sustainable funding that will help our state parks operate as an effective business and contributor to both state and local economies.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Okay, next up. And you don't need to repeat every point, just tell us why you're here and.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to be back in front of some of you again. My name is Johnny Finch, and I have a prepared statement, but based on what I just heard, I just want to say amen and hallelujah.
Amen and hallelujah. That was more than you could have said. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, it's Johnny Bench. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Chris,
members of the committee, for reasons articulated by Senator Marsden, former Delegate Dillard, and Friends of the State Park, we support this bill, and we would only add that if this bill encourages every vehicle-owning Virginian to visit a state park at least once, we'd be absolutely delighted and encourage you to pass this bill.
Great. Thank you, Chris. All right. All right. Anybody online? Anybody in opposition to the bill? Okay. Senator Hanger.
Mr. Chairman, this puts me in an awkward position because ever since I've been here, I've been trying to build out the state parks every year with additional parks and put as much into operation as we could. But I've shared this with our proponents, now particularly with Johnny and his wife. The Friends of the Park have really sustained us. They're active Friends of the Park groups all over the state that really make things balance out because we do inadequately fund our state parks. The problem I have is I think we should adequately fund our state parks from general fund, and rather than imposing a new fee. And I think we're in a position now to do it. And so that's why I'm hesitant. And one question I do have, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Anybody does, because I couldn't look it up right now. Currently, we're doing very well as far as non-general funds because we charge a lot for cabins, we charge the entry fees and all that, but I don't have a figure in my head as far as what we currently get from admissions, the fees that we charge currently for.
Does anybody, would anybody here from DCR know the answer to that? Yes. Looks like we got somebody.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Melissa Baker. I'm the Director of Virginia State Parks, a division of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I understand the question is what revenue we
What
derive.
do we get from admissions? What revenue?
That we would be not coming into us that we currently have if we were to do this instead.
Correct. So we average around $7 million a year on admissions and parking fees for Virginia State Parks.
Okay. But a portion of that's from out-of-staters.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay, all right, so we won't lose that. All right, let me just, I have to speak somewhat autobiographically. I have, my wife and I have a place down in Sandbridge, and there's a state park nearby called Falls Cape, and I ride my bike down there, and I never have any money on me, so I usually go flying past the little gate there without paying the fee, and the ranger chases me about a quarter mile until he finally gives up, and so this would prevent me from being maybe I have to put it on my bike, I guess. I don't know. I've hated those fees, okay? So I like this bill. I really do.
Mr. Chairman, if I could address Senator Hanger's concern, there's a lot of things we can fund this year, and the competition is just enormous, and the governor has put in $3 billion in cuts and what have you. The parks always come up the orphan in this. Here's a chance to fix it. This is a wonderful thing. It will attract businesses to Virginia if we have a park system that's first rate, and they're struggling. And I urge you to support this bill.
Okay, well, we've got the bills before us. I need a motion. Okay.
Refer to finance.
Barbara.
I will move to report and refer to finance.
I have a motion and a second to report and refer to finance. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Sarah Obenshain votes no.
Ayes 7, noes 7, 1 abstention.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Go ahead. What's the
Is the
question?
bill still before us? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well,
Would
we
it-
will.
Would, and I don't know if it would be acceptable to the patron, but if we made the $5 fee optional, a lot of people would still pay, would probably still check the box and add it. Would that make it more palatable?
All right,
I want something that we can have ongoing money that's
Okay.
dedicated.
Let's do this.
What
Let's
if it
just-
falls out of their wallet in front of the thing?
Let's just leave it on the table for now, and we're missing a couple members. So we'll have to pick it back up next week.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
All right,
Mr.
thanks,
Chairman.
thanks, everybody. We'll figure it out. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One question of Senator Stanley. Senator, is the misdemeanor offense of failing to pay your $5 at the guard gate 1 year still?
It's like
The statute of
Jean Valjean.
limitations?
Mr. Chairman, I'd answer saying every misdemeanor has a 1-year statute of limitations.
All right.
Thank you, Senator.
20 yards of hard labor.
And I have paid that fee, okay, so.
Okay.
I met him.
All right. Okay. Just going down the list, I got Senate Bill 272. Senator Hashmi, do you want to present?
If I can just see Jeff flying.
I have 550.
Oh, I apologize, Gonzalo. Okay.
551,
We got
but I believe
550.
we need a motion. I believe Senator Lewis was wanting to roll 504 and 506 into 551.
So we're putting 504 and 506 into 551. All right, so moved. So we got a motion and a second to move Senate Bill 504 and 506 into 551. This all has to do with resiliency. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. What?
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, there'll be a roll call vote.
It's a roll call vote. All right, clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Okay, so what we now have is a consolidated Senate Bill 551 in front of us, and Senator Marsden, you're the patron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This legislation comes to us from the previous administration. This legislation establishes that the Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR, shall serve as lead administrator of the statewide flood protection plan and the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan. DCR shall also have the responsibility to implement both plans. The legislation provides a minimum criteria for development of the flood protection plan and updates to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, which was released in December 2021. The master plan and accompanying web application, impact assessment, and project database can be found on the website. The legislation specifies that the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan will be updated no later than December 31, 2024, and every 5 years after at a minimum. Legislation directs the Chief Resilience Officer to establish the Virginia Coastal Resilience Technology Advisory Committee, the TAC, specifying membership and duties. The legislation requires DCR to work jointly with the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to prepare a community outreach and engagement plan to ensure meaningful engagement of and input from affected and vulnerable communities for updates to the master plan. And this legislation requires the Chief Resilience Officer to report to the Governor and General Assembly every 2 years on the status of flood resilience in the Commonwealth. And DCR, finally, is authorized to use funding from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund for studies of statewide or regional significance. And that is the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. A lot there. All right. Any questions for the patron? Anyone to testify in support? Okay. I see a lot of people moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Chris Stone. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I also serve on the Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding. I can tell you that this bill has broad support in the engineering community, in the planning community, but also as the chair of the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, it has broad support with the chamber in Hampton Roads. So I ask that you would report it out positively. Thank you.
Okay. Peggy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Peggy Sanner, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Thank you, Senator Marsden and Senator Lewis, for your work in bringing forward this bill. It moves the important work of resiliency planning into law and takes it statewide, creates a standing resilience technical advisory committee to help develop the program, and many of the other things that Senator Marsden recited, which I won't repeat, but I will note that sea level rise and recurrent flooding are a threat to water quality and wetlands along our coastlands. The extreme flooding is a threat to our cities in the upland areas. By developing a comprehensive resilience plan for the Commonwealth, we think this bill will help maximize Virginia's return on investment of limited flood funds and environmental co-benefits. We support the bill and urge you look upon it with favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Nikki.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to associate my remarks with what Peggy Sanner just said. We support this bill, and we thank Senator Lewis and Senator Marsden for bringing them forward.
And just for the record, who's your organization?
I'm sorry. I apologize. I work for the Nature Conservancy.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Adrienne Catula with the Chesapeake Bay Commission. As Senator Hanger and Senator Lewis know, we have spent many months in 2021 studying the issue of resilience policies in the Commonwealth. And thank Senator Marsden for this legislation, which accomplishes many of the recommendations that we made in our analysis. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Anna Killius with the James River Association. Just associating myself with all the aforementioned reasons, we also hope you support the bill and thank the Senator Lewis and Senator Marsden.
Chris, good. Okay. All right. Anybody opposed?
Mr. Chair, we have several people to speak virtually. It looks like most of them are in support, but I can't be sure.
Okay, if you could just tell them to if they're virtual, just state their name and their organization and that they in support. We don't need to hear a narrative.
Morgan Butler, please unmute yourself, state your name, your organization, and whether you support or oppose the bill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Morgan Butler with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and we support the bill for the reasons my colleagues from other organizations have outlined. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Mr. Calvert, please unmute yourself, state your name, your organization, and whether you support or oppose the bill.
Mr. Chair, Pat Calvert, Virginia Conservation. We're happily in support of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert. Sherry Neal, you'll be next. Please unmute yourself, state your name, your organization, and whether you support.
Thank you. Good
Thank you.
afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We thank the senators for bringing this forward. I'm Sherry Neal, Intergovernmental Affairs Manager for the City of Portsmouth, and we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. Emily Steinhilber, you're next. William Stiles will go after Emily Steinhilber. Please unmute yourself and begin your testimony.
William Stiles, I'm Executive Director of Wetlands Watch, and we strongly support this bill.
Emily Steinhilber, please unmute yourself.
Apologies, I got booted out. Thank you, Emily Steinhilber with the Environmental Defense Action Fund. I'd like to reiterate the comments of my colleagues and thank you for bringing this bill forward.
Thank you, Ms. Steinhilber. Robert Ross, please unmute yourself and begin your testimony.
Hello, I'm Robert Ross with the Friends of Indian River in Chesapeake, Virginia. This bill is very important. The implementation of the Coastal Resilience Plan is very important, and I urge you and thank you for supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Our final speaker will be Whitney Catchmark. Please unmute yourself, state your name, your organization, and whether you support or oppose the bill.
Whitney Catchmark with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. I do appreciate many of the aspects of this, but oppose it. I think there's some modifications that could be made to improve it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, there are no further virtual speakers at this time.
Okay. Any questions from the panel? All right. Does this need to be referred to finance? Yes. Okay. I have a motion to report and refer. Do I have a second? I have a second from Senator Vivola. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Sarah Openchain votes no.
Ayes 10, noes 5.
Okay. All right. Ayes 10, noes 5. The bill reports and goes up to finance. Senator Deeds.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got two bills. The first one is Senate Bill 292. It comes at the request of the Board of Supervisors of Rockbridge County. It names the Maury River throughout the county from the confluence of the Big Calf Pasture and the Little Calf Pasture, just the other side of Goshen toward Lexington, all the way to the confluence, its confluence with the James River as a scenic river. Now, parts of this river are already scenic river, but now the county's requesting it all be scenic. It's just about tourism. You know, it's a heavily fished river. There are a lot of people that enjoy canoeing, rafting on the river, kayaking.
It's not really that scenic, though, is it?
There are sections of it that are pretty scenic.
Okay. All right. All right. Uh-oh. Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. All right. Anybody have a support or opposition? Any speakers?
Mr. Chair, we do have one virtual.
Anna Achilles, thumbs up. I have a thumbs up from Chris. Okay, who else? Anyone else? All right, Peggy, good. Okay. You said you had one online?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Leighton Powell, please unmute yourself and begin your testimony.
Just
Pat
say.
Calvert, you'll be next. Oh, and
it's a yes, no, folks. Support or oppose?
Hi, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Leighton Powell with Scenic Virginia. We absolutely support this and make the point that this is an extension of an existing designation, meaning that the locality really likes it, likes the program, and wants to improve it.
Okay.
Pat Calvert, please unmute yourself and state whether you support or oppose the bill.
Mr. Chair, we support this wholeheartedly. Virginia Conservation Network.
Okay, great. Okay, we got a motion and a second to report. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Sarah Openchain votes no.
Oh, for God's sake. Okay.
Mason, Senator McClellan's proxy, please. Ayes 13, noes 2.
Okay, ayes 13, noes 2. The bill reports. Senator Deeds.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 305 also relates to something in Rockbridge County, but it authorizes the Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services to exempt food manufacturers that are producing low-risk foods as the Commissioner determines that definition in qualified historic structures. This is a historic structure bill from specified provisions of the Virginia Food and Drink Act or law or related regulations that pertain to the structure of the building. This is basically, we've got, in some of our older parts of Virginia, older communities. You've got grist mills and other historic buildings that are really tourist attractions. And this will allow them to continue to mill their grist, the grist and sell it.
Okay, so you've got one of these in Rockbridge.
Got one in Rockbridge, yeah.
And this is the VDAX commissioner?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any questions from the panel? All right, anyone here
Mr.
support
Chair.
or oppose the bill?
Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just was curious, Senator, you said that the definition of low risk would be at the
Would be-
will of the commissioner. Do we not have any kind
Subject
of
to
a-
the commissioner, I mean, that's, if you want to provide further definition of it, I mean, have at it, I guess, but the way the bill's written, it's up to the commissioner to make that determination. I think the secretary's going to speak to that.
Secretary Lohr.
Mr. Chairman, we're really talking about grist mills that are making flour and cornmeal. It's that type of food product, very low risk. And there's, I think, less than 10 or so of these grist mills around the Commonwealth, Mount Vernon, Wade's Mill, some of those that are tourist attractions. So really, it's very low risk. And these buildings or facilities also, in conjunction with Department of Historic Resources, together are determined that they're historic. So it's not like Farmer John's got an old barn and they can come forward and say, I want to make something. It's very, very restricted as to who would qualify.
Okay.
And the administration does support this bill. Thanks.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second report. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Sarah Obenshain votes aye.
Okay.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Food freedom, okay. Are we out of non-committee patrons?
Mr. Chair, we are at this time.
All right, Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is SB 272, and I believe we have a substitute. Has that been distributed?
Mr. Chairman, the substitute's been posted on LIS.
Okay. Okay, I've got a motion. Yeah, I got to be honest, it's very hard to kind of access these subs. Is it because we're in a basement? All right, I have a motion, a second to adopt the substitute. All in favor, say aye. Okay, substitute is adopted. Senator Hashmi, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The substitute is quite different from the original bill, so I'll just talk a little bit about the reason for the substitute. So this bill is to introduce helps to reduce Virginia's carbon footprint by fast-tracking VDOT's approval of new concrete mixtures that removes bureaucratic red tape for innovation, and it really is seeking to lower carbon concrete. So we originally began with the plan to take a look at cement production and reduce carbon emissions. This is a direction that the industry is already moving in. We've had some extensive conversations with folks in the industry, also with Delegate Wilt and the Virginia Ready-Made Association. The largest manufacturer, Titan, is supportive of the substitute. So what the substitute is doing now with the agreement of the various stakeholders is asking that Department of General Services will convene a stakeholder work group to begin this process and this conversation of the climate impact of concrete and recommend policies and practices to incentivize the reduction of air emission impact across the various agencies of the Commonwealth funded projects. So the work group is defined in the substitute. The work group would present its report to us November of, and this is a slight amendment in the substitute that I would like to propose, November of 2023. So if we can make that amendment, that would be great.
Okay, what line is that on?
That is line 40 of the substitute.
I will move adoption of the amendment.
Okay, we've got a motion, a second to adopt that substitute. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. That was November 2023.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm still not getting this on my system.
Touch it again, and then you'll get a little box that'll say open, and it'll come up.
Okay, I got it. All right.
It's a
All right,
section of the bill.
Senator Hashmi, do you have anybody here to speak in favor of the bill?
I believe we have Walton Shepherd online, and I don't think we have anybody else here.
Okay, Walton?
Yeah, hi, Mr. Chair, Walton Shepherd with the NRDC, which supports. This is a very promising opportunity to explore market-based voluntary approaches already adopted elsewhere to lower the considerable air pollution emissions associated with concrete production across the state in a way that rewards innovation. And just to conclude, I know other stakeholders really appreciate the senators bringing together of both environmental and industrial producer stakeholders, something you rarely see, but which is a very promising opportunity for common cause on an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Walton. Okay. Anybody else here to speak in support, either live or on the video? How about opposite? Oh, Chris, you good?
We support.
Okay.
And we're happy with the amendment.
Okay. All right. We've got a question. Go ahead, Senator Stewart.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just don't understand. Senator Hashmi, are you trying to get at carbon emitted in the process of making concrete or carbon in the concrete itself?
So carbon is emitted in the process of making cement. Cement production actually requires a lot of extreme heat, and so when that manufacturing process occurs, there is a large output of carbons in that process. The facts that I have is that concrete actually contributes 8 to 11% of overall global CO2 emission. If it were a country, it would be third in line for global CO2 emissions, just behind US and China. That's the magnitude of the concern. And industry folks know this. They've been working towards reducing that carbon footprint, and they are eager to work effectively in that direction.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the panel? Okay. Chair will entertain a motion. Okay, a motion to report. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I got a second. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Joseph, I have.
Sarah Obenshain votes no.
Ayes 9, noes 6.
Okay, 9-6, the bill reports.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let me move back. Senator Stewart, you want to illuminate us on the seafood industry ombudsman?
And then it's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 358, the way I would describe this bill is you cannot get people to pick crabs or shuck oysters anymore, period. A lot of us did that as kids growing up in the Northern Neck, and we were happy to make an honest wage to do it. You simply cannot get people to do those jobs. You all are aware that we have a vibrant industry in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I went to the inauguration and we went to dinner at one of the little local restaurants in Shockoe Bottom, and they had about 6 selections of oysters down there from various places, rivers in the Bay region. And the same thing when we were out in Roanoke for the finance retreat. I was shocked at all the restaurants out there that had them. So it's a huge industry in Virginia, creates a ton of money and tax base for the state, but the people can't get the workers. And so most often they get what's called H-2B workers. Mm-hmm. And those folks that are registered, they come in the legal way, they work, and they go back home. Mm-hmm. We chatted about this a little bit earlier. There isn't even a union that does this sort of work that's local in the United States that I'm aware of, or certainly in this region. It is just a very narrow area of workers that we need, and we're having difficulty getting. The federal agency that deals with this is run out of Missouri. And if you are one of those businesses that tries to get these workers, I'm told it's a nightmare. And so what this bill tries to do, and I don't know if we're going to get there or not, I would just ask you all to help me get this along to finance and try to figure it out. It would create an ombudsman that would work with or be a liaison between that office in Missouri and the folks who need these workers to help get this done. And what I have in the bill is a self-assessment from the folks in the seafood industry who would actually pay for it. I saw the budget impact, and we got a lot of work to do if this is ever going to work. But this is just an effort to get a person who can work with the federal counterpart and the folks that process this seafood that we all love so much in Virginia, so they can get the people they need to do it, because you can't get anybody to do it around here.
Senator Stewart, I guess the question would be, if you bring in workers from overseas, can they get an agricultural worker exemption?
It's called the H-2B program.
H-2B.
And it is a federal program. I even looked at the possibility of setting up state programs, very complicated.
Right.
To do this. Yes, the H-2As are agricultural workers.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother industry, and don't confuse those,
So
because
these are not agriculture.
right, because your union workers in the United States would fight you on that issue with H-2As. They have issues with them. It's a whole different issue. Unions don't care about H-2Bs because they're not going to do this work either. There are very few people who will do this work, and they literally have found this H-2B program to be one of the few ways that they can get this processing done.
Okay.
Is that a fair?
Sure.
I look at my senator from the Eastern Shore, if that's a fair analysis of that.
Senator Morrissey has a question.
Senator, connect the dots for me. I understand the need to have people come in and shuck oysters and pick crabs so that we can go buy our compartments of crabs. Connect the dots between what the ombudsman does and his office, and eventually getting workers to Bevan's Oyster House to do that work. I'm lost.
Right now, the oyster company does all that through the federal government, through an agency that's run in Missouri. And it is very difficult. It's very hard to get people to talk to. It's very hard to get your answers questions. It's very hard to get your paper processed. My hope is that if we can establish this ombudsman who will have a relationship with this agency in Missouri, we can make it much less difficult or much less complicated. I spoke with several folks about this, really just trying to come up with an idea to help, because it's gotten so difficult for them to get people to come and do the work. And this is the best idea I could come up with.
Check.
Yes, Senator Morrissey.
So I understand that the ombudsman is reaching out to the office in Missouri to help. How do you get the workers to come to, the northern
They have
neck?
these relationships. The issue is not getting the people to come to work. They want to come and work. And they love to come and work. They love the job. They work hard. They're good, hard-working, honest people. The problem is getting the paperwork processed through the federal agency. That's the difficulty.
And when they come to Westmoreland County, do they stay for
They
3
house
months,
them.
6 months?
They house them. So it literally will have dormitory-style housing that's done. It's zoned properly through the Board of Supervisors. It's nice housing. Take care of them. They work. When the season's finished, they go back home.
Okay, I think this bill's been pretty well explained. Is there a budget amendment?
It is, and it's got to go to finance.
Right,
and
obviously.
I need more work on it between here and there, quite honestly.
Okay, all right, let's push this thing along. Do I have a motion? I got a motion to report and refer to finance in a second. Please open the roll.
Senator Obenshain, how do you vote?
Senator Obenshain votes aye.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 509.
Yep.
So, Mr. Chairman, what I would say to you all about Senate Bill 509 is this is a baseline for folks in the aquaculture industry to be able to say that we too have a right to grow oysters in Virginia. And again, you all have seen this market for oysters throughout Virginia and the restaurants, not just Virginia, but all down the East Coast. I mean, we really are renowned for them. and you see oysters in cages oftentimes. Used to be they grew on the bottom. Then you had the cow nose rays and other problems. And so you got them in cages now, and you have a lot of people doing it, which creates conflict. And I know Senator Marston and I and Senator Lewis, a lot of issues in the Lynn Haven River at times, which we were able to work through. And that's an interesting story because I went to college at Virginia Wesleyan University many years ago, and I can remember when the Lynn Haven River was pretty foul. And really, it's been the oyster cages and the aquaculture that cleaned that river up. And yet now you have property owners who don't like the looks of them, and I get that. I take a different view. I was born and raised in the Northern Neck, still live there, and I look at all that as part of our heritage and our culture, and I think it's very important that we keep our heritage and our culture and the water industry, and this is just, the next stage of it. But it really just creates a baseline to say we can do this and we can do it legally, and I'm not sure it says any more than that.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, Senator Marsden, go ahead.
Senator Stewart, when these leases are granted, they're already, do they already take into consideration boat traffic to clear, to make sure that it's obvious where a boat can and can't go, and that these do not interfere with navigation?
They do, Senator Marsden.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Stewart, I had my own question. I'll defer to Senator Favola, but my question is, the right to farm statute, which I'm painfully familiar with, has to do with the right to farm your own property.
Right.
This is the right to raise shellfish or the right to have aquaculture effectively, which would be on state bottom lands?
That you properly lease.
Okay.
Correct. You have a lease interest in it.
You have a leasehold.
Correct.
Which a leasehold, of course, is not a fee simple. It's a defined right.
Right.
So the question then becomes, if I am next door, or I have a riparian right to the water, and you have a leasehold right, at some point, there's kind of like a Venn diagram here. Each person has an interest in that property, including the state, by the way.
Well, the state owns it, actually.
The state owns it.
So the people own the land, all subaqueous bottom, the people own it. And it's leased to individuals who want to use it to propagate oysters or whatever you're doing.
Well, here's my concern, and that is, let's say somebody has an oyster lease, and maybe they use it, maybe they don't, maybe they abandon it for a year, and the people that, let's say, they have the land facing that oyster lease, do they have any rights? I mean, do they, where are their rights?
So in terms of utilizing it, or in terms of the view shed?
The view shed, maybe taking a boat out, maybe going swimming.
So I don't think you can block their access, and I think VMRC controls that. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. The view shed becomes the issue.
Well, view shed's definitely an issue.
Becomes the issue, and somebody says, I don't like looking at those floats. Right. Or if the tide goes way out and you see the top of the cage, I don't like looking at that cage or something like that. But they are very important to our region. I will tell you that. And all this does, it doesn't impede on their rights. If you read what the bill says, this is a baseline, and I suspect that in years to come you'll see other bills to build upon this. This is not like the Right to Farm Act where you can't declare something a nuisance as such, which you're talking about, which goes a whole lot farther than we're talking about here.
Okay, and I'll simply I had, besides my family farm in Middlesex, I actually almost had a client in Matthews, which had a similar situation. There were oyster cages around what was a private beach and a boat dock, and it was not even with redistricting, still not in my district. Oh, his district, yeah.
His district.
Okay, but it was a nuisance, with a small n, and there was no legal claim at the end of the day. I'm just a little bit reticent that it's not the same as if it's their own property. Not quite the same.
Well, the bottom is owned by the people, and you have to lease it, so it's a little bit different. You have a leasehold interest.
You have a leasehold. Okay. All right. Barbara.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. and maybe they're where my question is covered in different parts of the code, but it just makes me nervous. If the entity giving this lease, which would be the state agency, so the state agency would be expected to ensure that the owner of the leasee met all the requirements regarding the protection of fish, right? And
Well, VMRC does all that anyway.
they would do it anyway, so
Yeah.
that would be part of this lease agreement. In other words, we wouldn't be compromising or
No.
subjecting any.
VMRC has requirements about leasing. You have to work that bottom. You have to do it every year. If you miss a year, somebody else can come in and get
Okay,
it.
so there would be
I mean, it's a
those
rigorous,
requirements.
it's a
Okay.
rigorous checklist, and people get concerned, because sometimes people try to buy up bottom leases and don't, because they don't want anybody else to do anything with it. But I will tell you, if you look at the studies, and I wish my friend Serval was in here because he can remember these things better than I can, but an oyster does more to clean up the water than anything else we figured out. And the more, yeah, the more you get in the water, the faster it's going to clean things up. And so I'm of the mind that as many of these oysters as we can raise, the better off we're going to be. Plus, I love to eat them. And so does everybody else. So
As long as this is done properly, and there are protections in other parts of the code, and you're an attorney, so I expect you check that.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Mason.
I have a question, then a comment at the appropriate time. Down on 62, where you add this language in the effective July 1, 2035, Commonwealth guarantees the rights of renter subject to right of fishing. I have no objection. I just don't understand that part.
Rights up there.
can you explain that?
Mr. Chairman, I am not entirely sure what the contingency is on the 2025 date, 2035, but
35.
some other act of the General Assembly has been passed in the past that
Yeah.
says there's something in 282618 that's going to change in 2035. That's totally unrelated to this bill, so it's just set out twice so that whenever the change happens,
Well,
what
this
we're
actually-
changing today would
This will be
carry
published
through.
in the code like this?
Yes, sir.
I've never seen that.
They did it, yes, we have done that before.
Really?
One of my bills that came before judiciary when I was changing different.
It's the main
parts of
reason
the
we want it. We
assault
want it to be
battery
in,
code.
we want it to be in law, yes.
Interesting.
Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to Ms. Wallmeyer because none of us be around here to worry about it, right?
Yeah, okay.
Could I speak to this at this moment?
Let me, Morrissey has a comment or a question, then I'll get back to me.
Senator Stewart, how large are these leases? Square miles or acres?
I need to phone a friend on that one. I think they can vary in size. It just depends on the amount of bottom that's good.
I'm
But
trying, oh, I'm sorry.
Probably somebody who can speak more to leases than I can.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, A.J. Erskine with the Virginia Seafood Council. Senator, they can range from anywhere from a few acres to a few hundred acres.
Follow-up question. Once you give out a lease, do the people actively work that lease by having their oyster cages out there?
Yes. My understanding is if you don't work them, you can lose those leases. You
Final
have to
question.
actively work them.
I think you actually gave short shrift to the culture that's involved in it, because I remember being down on the Northern Neck. We've had many discussions about it and seeing the oyster boats go out, the crab boats go out. Who's objecting to this? You've got these little kidneys that are operating out there that are cleaning up the bay, cleaning up the river, and you're collecting oysters. You said you love to eat them. Who is objecting to cleaner water?
Imagine you bought your dream vacation home with a nice dock and a beautiful view, and then you look out one morning and there's acres and acres of cages.
Well, I'm there, and I'm thinking of myself on Sandy Point now, looking out, seeing the boats go out in the early morning, the late evening, picking up the oyster cages. Actually, I thought it was a pretty beautiful sight. It doesn't bother me one bit.
Most of us do. Most of us like to see the watermen out there working and doing it.
And-
It's just, it makes it feel like home. Some do not.
And Senator Peterson, the option is, okay, a clean bay with oysters cages out there, or a more polluted bay and no oyster cages. It's a no-brainer for me.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mason.
So, Mr. Chairman, I wish Senator Varsi had been around for our work group a couple years ago, because those tears in his eyes would have.
I was working my oyster cages
I
at the time.
understand. So, Mr. Chairman, what I would say is we spent a long year working with industry, working with dock masters, working with folks that bought their dream home, trying to come to some solution. And there were a series of bad actors out there that would buy these leases, never touch them,
Right.
never farm them, tie them up. So we put significant new fees on the industry, transfer fees on the industry. We work with the people that do it for a living to try to come to a negotiated settlement. That was a good one because nobody really liked the whole thing. And we just finished that. We just did this. To me, Mr. Chairman, this bill simply says that the industry that has been around for centuries can continue to do what they've done. And here's the key, by whatever legal means necessary. So no new rights. It's whatever's legal today. You can continue to do it. You still got to go to VMRC and do it. We're just spelling out that it's important to Virginia, it's important to the
All right,
industry.
sounds
They
like a
work.
motion.
That's a motion to report.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I got a motion and a second to report. Clerk, open the roll. All right, I'm giving
Senator
this a light,
Obenchain, how do you vote?
a light green.
votes aye.
Light green,
Ayes 15, no 0.
light green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 629 finally just gives VMRC some flexibility in the oyster dates for taking up oysters. And Peggy had an amendment, which I had, but I
629.
can't find it. And I don't know if did you send it to staff?
My colleague did also.
You want to, maybe we could do it on the floor?
There was I'm happy to do it on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all
But I
right.
don't-
Is
I
there
don't think there's
any,
any opposition. There is an amendment I'm going to put on.
is there any
for
objections,
them.
Bill? Objection? No. Okay, we got a motion and a second to report to Bill. Clerk, open the roll.
Senator Obenchain, how do you vote?
Obenchain votes aye.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
All right.
Ayes 14, no 0, 1 abstention.
All righty, I think that's everything we have today. Sean, Lisa? Suiterline, you're going to take your bills by? Okay, what's the number? Okay, I have a motion and a second to take 146 by for the day. All in favor, say aye. All right, let us know. Okay, gang, we're done for today. Have a good day. Whoops, sorry.